Right, I'm on a roll here. My previous episode, we talked about civilian spaceships, and so I think I'm just going to go ahead and start talking about military spaceships and some of the considerations that I used, at least, to make mine realistic. But before I do that, I realized, and this is one of those crazy things, that I was talking about streamlined spaceships in the episode before this, and why we have them. And then I promptly went around and used the Borg cube as an example of a streamlined spaceship. Which, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and leave it though. I'll put something in the comments to say I realize that. And I think what I was trying to getting at was the underlying design principles for spaceships in science fiction are aesthetic. And that is true with both the Borg cube and all the various iterations of the Enterprise, and of course that iconic Star Destroyer from the Star Wars franchise that I included in the first example. So yes, I realize that not all spaceships are streamlined, and the aesthetic choice I made, at least with the civilian models, um, were to not make them streamlined beyond that dust shield, just because it didn't make sense from a physics story standpoint, trying to kind of make my ships, the civilian ships, those giant cargo ships, fit into the story. So anyway, I realized that it's like one of those things when I was reviewing it and I saw it, I was like, well, that was pretty much the op. Yeah, I'm going to leave it. Kind of an amusing oversight, talking, looking at myself talking so passionately about streamlining starships while there's a Borg cube on the screen. But anyway, so that was I kind of talked about, like I said, the civilian ships in the previous podcast episode. And now I want to talk about military ships because they have a whole different mission, obviously. And that mission is going to change how they're designed, obvious, right? And in this case, I'm actually going to make the case that if you have a military ship, it should be streamlined. And it's interesting because we don't tend to see that too much in the literature. I'm going to go ahead and pull up a couple examples. Of course, we have the Star Destroyer example. I'm not going to show that one again. But let's look at some of the ones that are out there, the famous ones. This is one of my favorite. It's the Sulaco. It's from the movie Aliens. And again, you can see here where aesthetic was the primary, motivation for how it's designed. I mean, it looks like, and I think James Cameron actually said he wanted it to look like a rifle, and it does that. It actually is a very mean-looking ship. Looks great. Not in any way, shape, or form something that you would be able to take into an atmosphere, though, right? At least not without really messing with high-level, science like gravity manipulation, stuff like that. So that's a good one. Another one is that I like is the UNSC Infinity. This is one from the Halo universe. Again, it just looks mean and brutal. And when you want to talk about like a warship, I mean, this thing looks like one, and it's very much has that sort of aesthetic to it. But again, it doesn't have a lot of smooth lines on it. It has some, of course, top and bottom, but in general, it's very blocky. It very much looks like the Sulaco in a lot of ways. Now, there are some ships out there, and I just actually pulled this out of a design web site. I can't remember where. But there are some spaceships out there. This isn't affiliated with any major science fiction universe that I'm aware of. That do are sort of streamlined, but they usually end up being something like this. I mean, you've got the conning tower, command tower pointing up at the back there. You've got like exposed turrets, et cetera, et cetera. So even the streamlined spaceships do have, various points that are sticking out on the side that aren't in any way, shape, or form streamlined. Although in this case, at least in this one, it looks like you could probably, put them down to make it a little more sleek. I don't know what you do with the front though. Still not something I'd want to take into a planet though. So again, the warship aesthetic tends to be brutal, clunky, big, and that's awesome, and it's good, and it's great. Also in the Expanse, when you look at, like, say, the Donager, for example, same design aesthetic. So, but this brings us to how is space combat going to play out? And I'm actually going to have a whole podcast episode just on that because I think it's a really interesting thing and very important if you're doing any sort of combat in your science fiction universe. Um, but I think rather than looking at it as like coming at it from the point of, like, say, water ships, like we do now, with aircraft carriers and all that, or jets, which we also do, have little fighter jets fighting each other. I think it would be a lot more analogous to submarine warfare. Um, and what I mean by that is it's a lot more based around stealth and avoiding being seen rather than just showing up, with all your cannons hanging out every which way and just shooting crap and, till things blow up. Submarine warfare is a lot different. It's very quiet. A lot of the technologies in submarines are designed to make them as quiet as humanly possible because, for the simple fact that if somebody can detect you, can find you, chances are they can kill you. If you're, the pressures, if you're under the ocean, I mean, the pressures that are the environment there is not forgiving for any sort of hull breach. So if you can knock a hole in the submarine's hull, it's not 100%. I'm sure there's safety systems designed that they can take at least a little damage before imploding. But in general, it's a lot easier to kill a submarine if you can find it than it is to, say, kill an aircraft carrier, which you can obviously find. Um, Not to say you can't do it. Of course, you can always nuke the hell out of anything and sink it. But in general, submarines rely on stealth and not being able to be detected for their survivability. And I think that's just going to be an even bigger consideration when you get out into space. Again, keep in mind, warships have the same kind of constraints that the commercial ships have. You can't just, you can't just dump a boatload of fuel in it and stuff like that, because then you have resupply issues. So you want something that's high acceleration, obviously, something that could probably stay out for a long, at least if it's not something that you just have in, like, say, lunar orbit, but if it's something that you want in between the planets, something that's got some legs that could actually stay out there for a while. And crucially, something that's hard to see and find. Okay. So how does this come into ship design? Well, again, when we start talking about armor, um, you get more bang for your buck if it's sloped. I mean, this is kind of a standard with, like, tank design, for example. So unless you're going to go super high tech, where there's these, like, metals that can withstand, like, massive impacts from, like, high G particles or warheads or something like that, you're gonna, why not make your armor sloped? Because then whatever you can save on weight, which is going to be a big consideration as far as acceleration and the fuel you need. But again, you also get the slope in there to kind of maximize your defense against any sort of particles that come your way. But also, if you look at, say, stealth bombers and things like that, anything that's going to deflect any sort of radar or anything like that is going to be an advantage. So the first stealth fighter that was out there, when you looked at it, I mean, it wasn't aerodynamic, but it did actually have a lot of these um, weird angles to it. So I could see doing something like that when you design a military spaceship. But the more advanced ones, they don't need these like weird blocky angles. Like I can't remember what the hell that fighter was, an F-100. Anyway, I don't think they use them too much anymore. They're obsolete. But the latest stealth bombers, stealth fighters, they're aerodynamic, obviously, because they got to be in atmosphere. But any surface that's going to deflect radar waves or something like that, or make you harder to detect, is going to be an advantage. So you might as well coach your warship in that, because you don't want the enemy to be able to see it. Which brings me to my next point, which is something that's always tends to be overlooked, is the vital importance of heat sinks. What a heat sink is it's a way that you can put your waste heat in something so that it's not radiating out for everybody to see in space. That's going to be critical, because if you've got this giant thermal bloom out there, I mean, you're going to be detectable from all over the place, even with just passive sensors. Um, again, you're kind of constrained by the speed of light, because if you've got this giant thermal bloom, it's going to take a while for it to reach whatever passive sensors are out there. But I mean, you'll light up like a freaking star if they can actually detect your waste heat. So you want some sort of technology where you can dump that, and then you can get rid of it whenever you don't need it anymore. Like like you're done with your mission, or you're in a safe place or whatever. You just dump that waste heat and get rid of it. So those are two, it doesn't really have anything to do with hull, I would say, with the hull structure, but it is something I would strongly encourage you to think about if you've got a warship, just making it as undetectable as possible. And heat sinks are a big part of that. Again, think submarines, not aircraft carriers. Okay. Um, and the reason that it's be so easy to kill a ship is just the sheer velocity of the weapons. I mean, if you accelerate up, say a torpedo, for example, um, even if you manage to destroy it and debris hits your ship, I mean, if it's going fast enough, it's going to be exceedingly difficult to have materials that can stand up to that sort of velocity, that impact, and not just vaporize. Um, so, spaceship, um, consider aerodynamic or streamlined hulls at the very least, just to minimize the impact damage and um, detectability. Um, I was going to actually, when I talk about warfare in space, I think I'm going to get into the specific weapon systems I think that make the most sense there. But in general, torpedoes are, they get used a lot, and I think they make a lot of sense. Um, so I'll get into the weapon systems a little bit in the next episode when I start talking about interstellar warfare in space. I want to talk specifically about the warships themselves. So, as an example, what I'm going to do um, here is just describe, and again, in the Regnum Humanitas universe, a uh, Solar Confederation frigate, which is kind of how I envisioned a warship, a standard warship being in this universe. The first thing, and most importantly, is it has to have legs, because the solar system is a big place, so you can't constantly be sending things out and back and out and back. So the way I envisioned this sort of fleet doctrine in this universe is you basically frigates are your long range patrol ships, which is kind of what they've sort of historically been. That ship class has been in human wet navies. So what you do is you send one out to a patrol zone, and you have it just basically sit out there to keep that zone, that region of space. Maybe it's a region of space where probably next to one of these trade lines where these giant container ships are going. So you stick it out there for piracy suppression. And you basically have all of its sensors set to passive. Remember the crew, this is crucial, the crew is in cryogenic stasis until you need them. So you don't have to worry about power and water and air and food and all that stuff because the crew's basically asleep until they detect a pirate ship and then they wake up. Now, a warship actually does have to have a lot stronger acceleration. You have to be able to quickly get to where you need to go. So I would say in this case, having the rocket nozzles on one end of the ship makes sense. I haven't actually decided on that. I was thinking about still having outriggers with them, but having them be a lot shorter outriggers, ones that are retractable, for example. Um, so I'll probably end up going with that just because of the advantage you get with maneuverability if you use the outrigger system rather than uh, the kind of rocket system, which is where you have the giant engine at the back. And because it's just floating out there, again, the amount of waste heat that you're generating is going to be much reduced, because your power, essentially what you're out there is your sensor package, your low-powered passive sensors waiting for something to happen in your patrol zone. And again, it's very hard for you to be detected because you've got this radar absorbing hull, and you've got heat sinks, which are basically concealing whatever waste heat that you are generating. And in fact, I would think that that would be the main thing that would limit how long you can leave a frigate out in one of these patrol zones. It's just because at some point the heat sinks aren't going to be able to absorb any more heat. So you're going to have to dump it, in which case you'll give away your position and then your mission is kind of compromised in a lot of ways. So it's a lot of ways, it's very analogous to these attack submarines that we would send out to kind of loiter off of Russia's shores to detect their ballistic missile submarines. So it's a very similar idea, although the distances involved are a lot greater because there's really very little to hide behind in space. Okay. So that's kind of my idea of a design aesthetic for a warship, and why I would make the point with them that making them big and blocky might actually not work too well. Again, unless you're doing them for aesthetic reasons, which is great. Again, the Sulaco works awesome in Aliens. The Infinity and the Halo universe, I mean, it's a perfect fit for it. It's a great design for that. But if you want to get beyond that aesthetic framework, consider making your military ships streamlined for the reasons that I've outlined, and actually think a little bit about the doctrine and how they would be used. And I think I'm going to call it quits there, and get into maybe my next one's about like how I kind of envision space combat and some of the considerations to use there. Okay, and that's